Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, officers. Welcome to our meeting of the Commercialisation of Future Finance Subcommittee. We have 9 items on our agenda for this evening's committee. This is a remote meeting of the council. It is being streamed live onto the council's YouTube channel. We are not in control of the comment section of the YouTube channel, so please, if you are using the comment section, do so considerately. If I can ask members and officers to keep themselves on mute during the course of the debate, it will enable others to hear each other. We'll kick off with agenda item 1. Apologies for absence, there are none. We are a full house of members this evening. Agenda item 2 are declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare an interest? No member is indicating. Thank you. Agenda item 3 are the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 5th of November. Firstly, members, are there any matters arising from the minutes? In which case, could I ask you to unmute yourselves as we take a vote on them being a true record? Councillor Harrison?
In favour.
Councillor Baggott?
For.
Councillor Rimmer?
For.
And I vote in favour. Thank you, members. Agenda item 4 is the work programme, which is laid out on pages 9 to 11. Does any member wish to add any reports to that work programme or make any further comments on the work programme tonight? No member is indicating. Page 9 does ask us to consider and endorse, so I'll ask members to unmute themselves again. We'll take a vote on the work programme. Councillor Harrison?
In favour.
Councillor Baggott?
Against.
Councillor Rimmer?
Against.
I will use my casting vote to vote in favour. Weird. Agenda item 5 is the commercial viability study of Basildon Council's building and operating a crematorium. This is a report listed on page 13 to 18. I should say that these are reports that we had discussed back in May as a committee that we had asked council officers to look at. And so this is an opportunity for members tonight to ask further questions about these areas that we have asked to look into. Hugh or Owen, who wants to kick this off? Hugh, I'll hand over to
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the council commissioned Cemetery Development Services to survey the borough, and their initial survey came up with 63 sites which met the criteria. However, of that, only 3 of the sites fulfilled all the criteria. When those 3 sites were further investigated, they're all located in the northwest of the borough, but they were subjected to pre-existing planning considerations, for example, residential and also relief roads for those residential areas which were planned. As a consequence of that, planning policy team recommended expanding the scope outside of the borough itself, which we did, and it was recommended that we looked at a neighbouring site in Chelmsford City Council area located in and around Southwood and Ferrers to the northeast of Whitford itself. Now, it has been known that Chelmsford City Council have been looking to develop a new crematorium because their existing site within the city itself has associated burial space which is running out, so they do need to look outside of the city. Because we knew that was happening, we made contact with Chelmsford City Council to find out what their feasibility was about and whether it would be a viable option for us to develop in and around their city area or their council area. Through those discussions, we found out that a previous private operator had applied for planning consent in exactly the same area which we were looking at, based on Southwood and Ferrers. And for those reasons, it was felt, and the recommendation is that as no suitable site could be found within the borough and in adjacent area, i.e. in Chelmsford City area, that a watching brief is to be kept until we identify a suitable site in the future. So I'm happy to take any questions on that, and I'll hand back to the chairman.
Thank you, Hugh. Members, I'll open this up for discussion. Does any member wish to kick us off? And having asked for the report 4 months ago, not a single member wishes. Councillor Harrison, bail us out.
Well, having read the report, I fully concur with what Mr. Reynolds has said. The options proposed in the borough are unsuitable for the reasons stated, and personally, I wouldn't have been looking to go outside of the borough to do it in another authority's area. So I'm happy with the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Brimmer.
Very much the same. Good report. Silence was consent, and for the good work that's been carried out investigating the sites and coming to the conclusions that you've come to. Important to keep a watching brief to see if any opportunities come up in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, of course, just to echo what people have said, if the report had come back and said we've identified 1 or 2 sites or this is it, then there'd have probably been more questions. But as we've been told, there aren't any sites in the borough. And I agree with Councillor Harris. I'm not too sure that we would want to necessarily be doing one elsewhere. Although, given that this is a commerciality committee, I suppose the question that should be asked is, if we thought that this was something that was commercially viable within the borough, I suppose the question is, why isn't it commercially viable outside the borough, or could it be? Because that would change the scope of the watching brief, really. So in other words, I'd just be interested in an officer view whether this is now dead as a dormouse, or whether there is a commerciality opportunity for the council by exploring elsewhere.
Owen, and then I'll jump on the back of that. Owen.
Thanks, Chair. I think obviously crematorium can be commercial opportunities and they can work. Obviously, it depends on the demand and the site, the constraints and the construction. Obviously, we were looking, even if it's outside the borough, but it might still serve residents. Obviously, people go out of the borough to crematorium and like, but really you're looking at scouring the whole country, looking for a site that's appropriate. Again, the amount of resource that would take to investigate that, and you almost act like a completely private developer for crematoriums. You do think that's really appropriate for us to sort of undertake that sort of national search, trying to find a site that might be appropriate, and the amount of resource and cost and time that would take to identify a potential site if we could find one.
Can I just come back, Chairman, because we've gone from the sublime to the ridiculous there. I wasn't expecting officers to be visiting the Orkney Islands to see whether there was a potential crematorium site. But of course, the world is bigger than Basildon. And the question was closer to home. If we were saying initially that we thought there was a commercial advantage to us operating one, this isn't anything to do with necessarily, obviously the needs of the residents is important, but this is the commerciality committee looking at ways of bringing additional revenue in to the council, because additional revenue equates to keeping taxes low and keeping services as they are. So the question is more, are we saying that there is no real commercial advantage at all, in which case it's dead, as I say, it's dead as a dormouse, or is there a commercial advantage, and is it therefore something that we should be looking within a reasonable range of geography?
I think that's the point, isn't it? What is the perimeter for outside of the borough that we're kind of looking at the moment? What has kind of governed the thinking, Hugh, so far when it comes to where we would look outside of Basildon?
Well, one of the set criteria for location of a crematorium is the 30-minute drive time. It's listed in the report itself, so it's not going at 30 miles an hour, but it's going at 60% of the speed limit within the area. So that does curtail, if we're going to focus it on the borough itself, it does curtail how far outside of the borough you go. The reason that if I could continue, the reason why South Woodham Ferrers was selected was because that did in fact fulfil this sort of 30-minute criteria, and its catchment was enough to ensure that the commercial viability of up to 700 cremations a year possibly could be achieved. However, as we would be going outside of our authority area, and planning consent had already been refused in more or less the same location, it was felt the commercial viability just wasn't there. Plus, Chancellor City Council are looking to develop their own crematorium, as I said earlier, and it's further advanced than ours. And I believe that we would, to put it plainly, be competing for the same people, if that's the right language to use. And because they are that much more advanced than us, we would be on catch up, and probably we wouldn't have that commercial viability of the project itself. Thanks, Jeff.
Saturated market, I think, is what you're referring to there, Hugh. Councillor Rimmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It just sparked another question for me, really, is, Hugh, is there any merit in actually some sort of partnership with Chelmsford in terms of the crematorium? Have we actually discussed that in any form?
Hugh?
Yes, that was the Thanks, Chair. That was our contact with Chelmsford to find out whether there will be some partnership arrangement we could get into. Although it wasn't an absolute no, they weren't in favour of continuing with us, as they had already developed their own plans and had been speaking to Braintree as a potential partner. So we were a little late at the party, let's say, to get into partnership with them.
And I think, just building on that, I think our chief exec has spoken to their chief exec today, and that was reiterated, or something similar was reiterated again today. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, so I think the point's been missed, and that's my fault then for not asking the right question. When this was first mooted with the chief executive, it was being mooted on the idea that crematoriums, forget the service they provide to the residents here, a crematorium as an outlet has commercial advantages and the ability to actually be profitable. So the 30-mile limit is irrelevant, because if, for instance, Basildon Council decided to build a crematorium in Kent for the residents of Kent because it's profitable, it would be for those within the 30-mile catchment area of those residents in that area. The question I'm asking is, are we now saying that crematoriums are not commercially viable? Because if they're not, we're wasting our breath on any further questions. If they are, what is the geographical range? Because I take on board Mr. Sparks' point, we'd only be going to the Orkney Island to explore whether or not there's a site there. What is the geographical range that could be explored with a view to exploiting any gaps in the market in that area?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Baggott. Owen, do you want to come in on the point that Councillor Baggott, the first point that Councillor Baggott was saying around, is our assessment now based on this that they are or they are not profitable and worth pursuing? Yeah.
So again, picking up some of Hugh's points, there's a turnover level that a crematorium is profitable. So again, back to that location point, it's finding a location where the estimated throughput meets that criteria, in which case a crematorium is profitable, and obviously it can make a commercial return. I think the issue we struggle with is we've looked in key areas, we identified there is likely to be a market. So obviously you can expand that and dig deeper. It's just when do you stop doing it? So I think immediately we've obviously looked at the borough. We've looked at some key areas where we think there was a potential demand and a potential gap in the market. We could go further, but it's just about how far you push that out, really. I think we've done the obvious areas we've looked at, but obviously we could go further, but it's just that point you stop, really.
Okay, so to build on that point that Councillor Baggott has raised, and one of my questions I was going to have is, define for me what we mean by watching brief.
So I think, go on, Stu, you jump me team.
Yep.
So I think by watching brief.
So what?
So my screen keeps freezing, so I don't know if it's me or It's you
I'm
guys.
going to watching brief on this.
Yeah. Go on,
Yeah.
you go
Well,
first.
I'm going to go. Fine. Yeah. So the watching brief within the borough, it's whether any of the planning constraints on the sites that have been identified are removed for whatever reason, and then we could bring those sites back to consideration again. And outside of the borough, the watching brief would be, for example, if Chelmsford City Council, for whatever reason, didn't develop their crematorium, that could give a commercial advantage for us looking again within their district city area for development. So that's the interpretation of the watching brief as it is. Although I do take the point that where is the line drawn outside of our borough? How it's a commercial enterprise. So as Councillor Baggett says, potentially we could go really quite some distance away. And I don't think we've got in our own mind exactly what, how far one would want to draw the line around the borough to be looked at.
Okay, so could I ask then, Owen, do we obviously instruct people like DTZ and others? Is there any expertise out there who can help with the identification of such a site?
So we'll use the consultants start off with to help us identify a site, but what we need to do is to say to them, this is the site we want you to investigate. So the consultants helps us identify the sites, look at the constraints, look at what might be appropriate, but we need to say to them, and now could you focus in this area? Now they may be able to give us a few pointers, but we need to sort of specify, yeah, they need to then do that GIS, do that mapping, look at the planning constraints, look at development on it. So we need to guide them. So it's not a case of, yeah, there's one there. We need to give them a brief to explore in a certain area.
And that would have cost implications that we need to understand. Councillor Harrison.
Now, can I come in, Chairman? This report was to look to see if we could find a suitable site within the borough. The answer to that at this point in time is obviously no. As a question whether on a commercial basis we will be looking for an investment elsewhere in the country or whatever for a crematorium, personally I would think that was something we wouldn't look for. That all the criteria we've taken for investment so far, I'm not sure I would go along with that being in that criteria. That's a personal.
And there's an ethical thing as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
Councillor
Did
Baggett?
you call me, Chairman? You froze.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Baggett.
Yeah. Again, I mean, when this was first posited, the absolute aim was to be looking at it from a commercial point of view, as opposed to a service point of view. So slightly disagree with Councillor Harrison on that. And I do get the ethical side, but the reason I'm asking this is there has been lots of talk at lots of different levels about local plans, about how many additional houses are going to be built in the southeast, about garden villages being created, about new towns being created. Well, when you have that level of population, guess what? You actually need somewhere, unfortunately, to bury or cremate them. And that's why I'm asking the question, because if crematoriums are profitable, the idea that with all of this additional house building and creation of communities doesn't need any crematoriums anywhere, I would refute. And therefore the question is it something that is commercially viable or not? And if it is, why aren't we exploring and looking at those particular areas?
Okay, Owen, do you want to answer that one, and then I think we'll draw a line under this item.
Yeah, we can do. I think again, looking at our local plans, obviously lots of our draft local plan, there's lots of development going on in the borough, but there's still not a recognised need for an additional crematorium. And the other thing we've also found is lots of parcels of land that particularly, potentially could be viable. There may be options on already. So even there's a bit of land that's not in local plan at the moment. So again, it's still quite an in-depth bit of work to do, but totally accept it that obviously there's more development going on and there's a higher demand, but it's still a lot of investigation to do to actually drill beneath that and find those opportunities.
Okay. Members, are there any further questions or points of clarification on this? In which case, can I ask you to unmute yourself? The recommendation is on page 13. And if we move to the vote, Councillor Harrison.
The recommendation.
Sorry, can you say that again? You were muted.
In favour of the recommendation.
Councillor Baggott.
Following the conversation we've had, I will now be abstaining.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
Thank you. And I vote in favour. The recommendation is carried. Thank you to Hugh. Thank you, Owen, for your work on that. Agenda item 6, the fees and charges report, pages 19 to 34. Kirsty, over to you to introduce the report.
Okay, as part of the report, we've been looking at how we review our fees and charges as an organisation. Earlier in the year at P&R, we agreed a new scheme for fees and charges, which set out how we should be charging, what we should be including in our charges. As part of this work, we've done some further investigation around charging methods that would be really useful to have in place. And we've looked at our organisation to sort of see where we've had any issues across. And, you know, one of our big things that's come up is around full cost recovery and ensuring that services understand their costs and how that influences their pricing and their fees and charges. Looking at how similar charges are charged across the council and how consistent they are, and looking at the eligibility for concessions and applying concessions consistently across the council, and ensuring that price rises are applied and that, you know, uplifts are taken, especially for non-statutory services. So we've done this review, and there's a few items that we think might assist in pushing forward our fees and charges agenda and maximising the income that we're able to achieve. For many of our services, we're trying to act quite commercially. So we're doing work around trade waste, we're looking at community halls, we're looking at open spaces, and dynamic fees and charges would really support in operating more commercially. So, you know, things like weddings in the summer months, they're much more popular, so we can charge a higher charge, and in quieter months and during the winter months, we could charge a lower amount to ensure we can drum up demand. It also enables us to change prices on things like meeting rooms or tickets on something that's very close to the date and we've still got availability that enables us to maximise income. So where we may normally have a vacant hall, it's much better that we charge a lower price and we're gaining some income from that. So that's one of the recommendations, obviously, that we look at methods such as this to help us to act more commercially. Also things like bulk purchase. So if somebody is a training provider is coming in and, you know, renting a room for a number of weeks or months, that we can put some pricing in place that is reflective of that continued business, again, allowing us to be competitive in the market with other people. I think at the moment we have no way of sort of negotiating prices. So we're looking at having framework prices. So members can look in terms of governance. When we set fees and charges, we can set minimum and maximum prices for a service, which then enables service managers and officers within the service to, you know, look at the fees and charges on a customer by customer basis and to look at competitor quotes and act more commercially. So we're looking at introducing these methods that would enable us to act more commercially. We're also looking at Service Plus. So it could be a statutory service where we could add an additional charge to a statutory cost to enable an improved level of service. So that may be a reduced time frame for a service or a wait time. So we can gain the additional income on our statutory fee and would allow a customer or a resident to get a much better level of additional service or expedient service. We're also looking for advertising our pricing. For some services, such as trade waste, it may be beneficial to not publicly advertise our pricing. Most of the competitors in the market for a lot of things don't advertise their pricing to ensure that they remain commercial and that, you know, there's a point of negotiation when taking on new customers. So it may be beneficial to review in the future. Some services that it may not be beneficial to advertise the fees and charges throughout the year. one of the key areas we've also looked at is around how fees and charges are reviewed, and it's been quite sporadic across many departments. And I think, you know, the agreement of fees and charges at service committees, it's really useful for ADs and heads of service to know where costs aren't being recovered or are being subsidised very heavily. So the commercial team have been working within services to identify these areas, helping them to attain better knowledge of their costs and then reporting that back up so we can make much better decisions as an organisation as to what we would like to subsidise as an organisation and what we wouldn't. So overall, we've sort of set some recommendations in place that will help to support the existing fees and charges scheme, but would also allow service transformation and service change, which will enable us to act more commercially and to be able to work against competitors in the current environment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kirsty. Before I bring members in, Owen, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think Kirsty's covered it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. As the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee seems to have the bulk of the fees and charges on its budget, I've got a few comments. On the review of current fees and charges, and Kirsty, I know you're looking at the parks and countryside services.
Yeah.
But where we start looking and going for looking at the true cost,
yeah,
we already discussed this with Mr. Brace, we need to start looking first of all of how we charge, how we cost the items, because there's 1.7 million put in that budget for, in effect, the parks and countryside.
Yeah,
it's put in as a third-party payments to cover all the options, but we can't break down definitively how much it costs for particular items. And I've asked, and I'm hoping I've been banging a few heads, that what we need is to have, so we understand exactly what we're spending, what we need to spend on an item, so we're proactive in our planning, exactly the same as we want to do with the play areas, rather than being reactive. And what we're doing is spending the money as people ask for it to be spent, rather than planning what it should be spent upon. Now that is important to get that straight, as well as being commercially responsible and getting full charges back for what it costs us. On dynamic fees and charges, one of the things I'll ask the office to look at, and I hope all members would support, is a reintroduction of the BAS card as we used to have, or something similar across the borough. So we differentiate commercially between residents in the borough and residents from outside the borough, as we used to do previously, and it was very, very popular. So there's something there. You talk about roundabout sponsorship. I think we've already started there, because we have a certain amount of sponsorship on roundabouts. We've already started to classify them as A, B, C and D roundabouts. We're not quoting prices for them. They are negotiable, with the options going to be, you do the wildflowers on those roundabouts, etc., which saves the cost of the grass cutting on them, and they take on the full maintenance. So that's being discussed. In terms of bulk purchase, well, we do that already in some of them. We do season tickets for bowls, etc. We do season tickets, in effect, for X number of games for some of the football matches, football, etc., rugby, cricket. But when we look at those, when you get the agenda for the NMPS committee, you'll see that on most items there now, even down to community centres, we are listing the operational costs and the income from those, and you'll see the different percentage amounts on, in effect, so you recognise the subsidy which is being given to all of those services. That will be on that's on the agenda, which is coming out, should be out now. The interesting thing is, and I think it's fair to say it here, is that when you look on some of the fees and charges on the sports side, we'd need to increase them by something like 520% to break even but that's based on what we think it costs to service those facilities. So I go back to the point I made first of all. We need to know and work out the true cost of how we provide those facilities first. We could do that with the play areas. We've got a 10-year plan. We should have similar plans right across the board on the parks, on the sports activities, so we know exactly where we're going. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Baggott.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I want to thank officers for the report and the hard work that's gone into it. I think it is a challenge when we're talking about commerciality in general, about how to make it work. But in this, there's a number of issues that I have. One, it does give the perception that rise to the challenge of being a commercial council is to go for the low-hanging fruit, rather than what I'd originally envisaged, which was to be thinking outside the box and being a little bit entrepreneurial in aspect. But my bigger concern is that this report is a bit light on detail, and the detail here is something that could very much bite us as a council. If the perception is that service A is now charging at peak time, but that doesn't apply to service B, it's the impact it has on the public and how they perceive it, that all of a sudden the council are mismatching what they're doing, and that therefore there's some sort of agenda or motive that this is being done to them rather than something else if we're not careful. And you could say, for instance, use a bit of an example which wouldn't apply here, which is why I'm picking it. We noticed that the taxi trade, a lot of them renew their licenses in March. We'll put the fee up in March because we're having to do more work. We get very few doing it in November, so we'll give them a discount if they renew in November. Why would you do that? But there's those sorts of implications. What I would like to see, rather than agreeing now that we have a flexible charging structure without the detail, is that detail is provided either to this committee or to Policy and Resources, so that we can actually vote to approve something which has got substance and we know what the consequences might be. But right now, just saying carte blanche, yeah, let's run with flexible charging without understanding it a little bit more, I think it just could leave us open and bite us in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's actually, it was very interesting. I think the way it's been presented has actually given a bit more light on it as well, and some great ideas in here for the commerciality side of things. I have some concerns too about this dynamic pricing. I think we've seen dynamic pricing models in businesses where the customer does feel abused, where there's cookies on a website that mean that if you look at it on the second day, you're more likely to get a price increase for that same booking, even if there is no extra demand. The sort of surge pricing model that we've seen in the applied by some business models, without naming any commercial names here, I'm being very careful not to. I think we would want to see some safeguards, some sort of parameters to this for our residents. I think these are great ideas, but to sign off on this, I feel more comfortable if we saw those safeguards and parameters first. I do sort of, you can understand, the idea of somebody wants to have a wedding in the summer, that it might cost them more than if they have it in the winter, but I wouldn't want it to be astronomically more as well. I also have a concern about what we do with our reports on equality statements, and I've raised it in a few different meetings, a few different committees. Again, we seem to have just done a tick box exercise on this report to say there's actually no equality impact at all. But actually what we do know is that for older people in particular, for more vulnerable people, some of the services that could be impacted by the increases here would have an impact on them because of the participation rate in community, that social participation rate is a factor as well. And note, for instance, that there are higher than inflation increases, for instance, for the George Hurd Centre, that's running at 5% in one of the enclosures. So I think we just have to acknowledge that there's an impact and talk about how we seek to mitigate it with the measures that we're putting in place when we look at any of this.
Thank you, Councillor. Owen, you want to come back on that?
I was only just going to say, obviously, just to reassure members, obviously these are just sort of parameters to work within, and obviously all fees and charges are agreed at service committees. Obviously, with some of that additional work and diligence happens, and members will consider the reasonableness of each fees and charge in isolation and in terms they do at the moment. So this isn't actually setting the fees and charges, just given that framework for officers to work with the relevant chairs to then be able to present those fees and charges for that relevant committee to consider.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's a couple of other things as well. One is that clearly the point that Councillor Rimmer just made there about sort of vulnerable lower income families, actually they could potentially in a differentiation model actually get more access to some of this stuff as well. If, as Kirsty has said, we're lowering the price of some of these things in order to get more people into using some of these assets and some of these facilities. So it could go the other way. It's not always the case that demand goes one way. So we need to understand that. I think the idea that we're just focusing on low hanging fruit, I think is slightly misleading here. I think it is important that we look at all of the options available, because when you're a council that has a £7 million COVID black hole, you're not really in a position to say no to looking at any of the potential income streams that the council could explore. So it's right and proper that we do that. But of course, the council has also been quite ambitious in its lending and leasing and direct investments over the last few years, which have been innovative and have not had the support of all members on this committee. So if not this, and if not that, what? And I think that is something that we would, this committee is a cross-party committee to try and understand and bring some ideas to the table. So if there is innovation, I'm yet to hear it, but I would welcome it. I think we also need to think about a couple of other things that will be coming forward for us. BTCM, so ending the nightmare of a 30-year quango that hasn't given the council control over its own town centre has to end and is coming to an end. So understanding what we can do around BTCM is, I think, an important part of this. And also we have already spoken just today, myself and Owen, about looking at things like digital advertising as well, and using the assets around the town centre to be able to do that. And as we come forward with the master plan and we look towards the public realm improvements, I know that our head of communications has already started having conversations about digital advertising and about how you use digital advertising as a way of lighting places, making places look and feel safer. And there are various different things that you can do with it in town centres. And clearly, as we look to levy money on developers to help us to pay for the public realm and the upkeep of the town centre, and be in control of more through acquiring or taking the larger share in BTCM or whatever it might be, there is options there for the council on that as well to take forward. A point of clarification is just that for this to come to PNR, it will be coming in January. So again, there'll be another round in January for the members of this committee to come to PNR, or Craig, you can ask Andy on your behalf to raise your questions at PNR, and you would have an opportunity there to get the assurances that you need. So I think it's a very good report. I thank officers for it. And as Owen has said, it sets a parameter for us to take to these service committees and then into the budget in February. I think Councillor Baggott, you had indicated, and then Councillor Rimmer.
No, Chairman, I'm happy. Thank you.
Satisfied. That is what I like to do. Councillor Rimmer.
Well, you didn't satisfy me, Councillor, but I am satisfied with what the officers have said.
You surprise me. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say, so you've come out with a mitigating factor. You've come up with something on the equalities measure, and that's something that should be included in the report. So that's the key aspect. If you're saying that the dynamic pricing could actually help, it needs to be in the report under the equality section. And I just want a sort of message to get through to officers that we should be documenting that how we've actually addressed the equalities issues. Other than that, I'm satisfied with what Owen has had to say.
Councillor Harrison.
Now, of course, as Kirsty will probably concur, there are already items like that in the fees and charges for senior citizens, etc. That's already there, a lot of that. Whether it can be expanded upon, I don't know. But I agree with you that it's not going for low-hanging fruit, it's getting it right, because otherwise we're going to carry on like we've done for most years. It's just adding 2% on for inflation across the board, and that isn't the right way of doing it, because there's some that can stand a little bit more and there's some which might require a little less. So I think it's a balance. A lot of it we're going to have to put a subsidy on, but it's where you place that subsidy and to what amount and how you do it. I think that's very important. Thank you.
And I also think, setting the parameters in the way that we are here means that in things like the town gate and other things, that actually there's a new market for them to potentially play in, which, as we come out of COVID and we look to get the arts and culture back up and running in our borough, that is going to be a crucial part of the recovery plan there for arts and culture. Members, we have debated this for long enough, and it is the recommendation on page 19. If I could ask members to unmute themselves, we will move to the recommendations. Councillor Harrison.
For both.
Councillor Baggott.
For.
Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
And I vote in favour as well. So the fees and charges report is carried. Thank you, Kirsty, for that. Agenda item 7 is the commercial procurement update, listed on page 35 to 42 of your agendas. Kirsty, again, this is over to you.
I think, Chair, I'd offered to do an introduction to the report, and then Kirsty can provide some of the detail. And that introduction, if I may, is that I did bring a report back on the 30th of July that set out some work which had arisen as part of the council accessing the Local Government Association's productivity expert programme, and commissioned some consultants as part of that at no cost promote to undertake some work and analyse our spend and other areas to identify areas that may benefit from further investigation on which we could perhaps obtain better value. The report sets out some background to that and the methodology, and sets out 4 particular areas that were identified for further work to be undertaken. I think we discussed at the last meeting, there's no doubt various areas and those can be picked up by service committees, but it was important to focus on what was considered to be the highest priority or benefit that could be achieved. And those are set out in the report, and those are the Morgan Sindall contracts, procurement of utilities, stores provision and corporate contracts. The work of Promote did identify other areas that are being taken forward, but not as particular strands of work under this programme. So things like agency spend, which the Deputy Chief Executive is leading a piece of work on at the moment, and also issues around the ICT strategy and digital opportunities, which again this subcommittee has discussed. And which we will discuss as the next agenda item. So they brought the report then that provided an update on then. Since that time, Kirsty has joined us, which is great, and has taken the lead on some of these programmes. I'm still providing oversight on the corporate works contract that's been undertaken, and as we undertook on the 30th of July to bring back regular updates to this subcommittee, just setting out how those matters are progressing and the current position, and those are set out in the report. Myself and Kirsty will be happy to answer any questions as appropriate.
Members, are there any questions for either Mr. Birkinshaw or for Kirsty? Do not all rush at once. Councillor Harrison.
I need to say at this point in time is I'm happy with what's been done so far, and I look forward to what comes back next.
Thank you. I think to echo what Councillor Harrison has said there, I mean, I have a contracts are a bugbear of mine within this council, and more generally. I think there is a question about how far we audit social value. I think there is a question mark about whether that is ever actually fully, properly reported, monitored, tracked. I think there's a question about that. I think, not to get into commercially sensitive information on part 2 here, but there are 3 members on this call who back in the start of the COVID pandemic were looking at a potential through the Staffing Matters subcommittee of a bailout for one of our contractors, and there was all manner of different questions or kind of, I think, understandings of what that contract may or may not have looked like and entailed, and commercially what was in there. And I think what we've learned is that it was a bit of a mess, to be honest, and we probably were not as kind of watertight commercially there as we would have liked. And then we've looked at obviously the way in which we are going to extract value out of these contractors who we've helped during COVID and who we've kept during COVID on the straight and narrow. And clearly we as a good partner have done that, but we want to make sure that we get every penny for the taxpayer in value and that return on that investment. So, and that's not something we can necessarily think or complete now. We won't have that full picture until the moment we've moved out of this and COVID is consigned to the history book. So the committee will have to look at that going forward. But I certainly think, it's just, again, a source of frustration really that these kind of contracts they're major. There is a whole debate about insourcing versus outsourcing, single point of failure, all of that stuff as well that people constantly are talking about in the kind of local government family more generally. And there is a question mark about negotiation, about skill in negotiating contracts, and about the capacity to be able to do that, to extract all commercial value as well for the council, and about whether or not some of the ways in which these contracts are, so if we look at the report, obviously we're talking about a kind of property FM maintenance contract, we're talking about utilities, we're talking about leisure, whether or not the kind of contracts that we've got here are actually fit for purpose in 2020 and ongoing, or whether there is different models that should be used. And again, not necessarily, and I don't want anyone to look at what I'm saying here as being reflective of my views on these contractors, but in other parts of the council, we engage in leases, we engage in long-term plans for various things. And actually, again, is that the right thing to do, or should there be trusts? Should there be different models, different pathways available as well? So I think there's lots of questions that this sort of stuff opens up. And I think that, this is something that, we spoke earlier on about watching brief. I think, we should have a watching brief on lots of these contracts as councillors. And certainly I think we need to think about how we audit social value as well, because I'm not convinced we, as members, get a full update each year on the social value side of things and where contractors are on those kind of things. We hear wonderful stories about BAS works and other things, but what is the actual people story behind that? Question mark. But anyway, Paul wants to come back in and then I'll go to members.
Yeah, Chairman, just to come back really, and I think in fairness would echo the scope for improvements for the council with regards to procurement and some of the matters you raised, and that's not new, that's reflected in the annual governance statement, and so it's an identified area in the council's governance arrangements. I think partly that historically, procurement sitting within the legal section and continues to do some really good work around procurement, but that tends to be in simply dealing with the contracts and some major ones in delivering the council's ambitions. But we are, to give members some assurance, we are now working, so myself, Owen, bringing together the new commercial team, and obviously Kirsty's appointment is key to that, and the procurement function, in order that we address much better those types of issues that you raised there. I think through various pieces of work. So Promote likewise recognised that the council could benefit from improvements in its procurement function and how it manages contracts. So I think it's just to acknowledge the point that you're raising. I think that's acknowledged in the AGS, but to try and give members some assurance that as we're now improving the capacity within both legal and procurement and commercial, that is an area of priority. We've already started work on that. And perhaps it's something which would be useful for us to bring an update to the subcommittee on in the new year in terms of the issues which we're progressing, but just to give hopefully some assurance that we're aware and starting to address that through that increased resource.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Ask, who monitors the contracts over a period of time? I'm going back a long while in history now, because I was here in a previous era, when the committees then, about every 3 months, whichever committee covered a contract, reviewed how that contract was progressing for the council. At the moment, unless I'm mistaken, I assume there's no member who reviews contracts. All we know is, like, when one's coming up to be renewed, we know about it. When one needs extending, we know about it, etc. So just a question. Thank you.
Do you want me to come back on that, Chairman? I mean, I think, yeah, members will be aware that that role of members in contracts is not there, because otherwise you would have seen that. I think there's obviously a contract manager for each contract. And the awareness or the amount of effort they're putting will depend on the contracts with regards to that, and whether it's a dedicated post or just part of somebody's job. But contract management is an area, one of those areas that I've mentioned, identified in the annual governance statement, around where we need to improve. And I would agree, perhaps Councillor Harrison, that members have a key role to play in that through the service committees, and that's getting back into that commissioning and procurement cycle. So right from the start, around what is it we want to deliver, right through the procurement, and then continuing through that circle in terms of monitoring its delivery and reviewing ahead of that. So that's certainly an area to improve, and I would agree that members have a key role to play in that, and it's an area where there's scope for improvement. I would agree.
Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Chair. No, this is good, and we've been looking at this. It'd be nice to see the sort of direction of travel with some of it as well, and I think that is coming. I agree with the Chair in respect of the sort of social value of these contracts as well. One thing, without naming names or going into any part 2 information, is we do hear we get the anecdotal side of it. We're dealing with complaints or queries about services, and probably we're getting the sharper end of things where things fail, where you do have to look at the macro level, and that's what you do, and actually see how the contract is performing as a whole, but also looking at actually complaints and how things are resolved, and the experience of our residents with those services is a key part of this contract management as well, I'd say.
Thank you. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, I was just picking up on Councillor Harrison's point, because you're absolutely right, it did. I think it was called scrutiny, but I mean, you got rid of that.
The wrong era. I was thinking before that.
Very drawn.
Before scrutiny, which used to do it and then got rid of. Now nobody does it.
Which party were you in at the time, Councillor Harrison?
At the time, I know, you probably know as well, Gavin probably knows. But I got the same attitude now as I did then, that I think things should be open, transparent, and things like contracts should be reviewed by members. And it was a committee system in those days. It was a committee that reviewed them, exactly the same as now. And as I believe, the committees have the option to scrutinise things now, and it's up to the chairman of those committees and members to make sure we do.
I agree with that. And of course, what we're doing here is also part of that process. So, members, the report is, as I say, listed on page 35 and 42. The recommendation is only asking us to note, so therefore we don't need a vote on noting the report. So thank you again to Paul and Kirsty for your help there. We come to agenda item 8, which is the digital and IT update, which is a verbal report. And Paul, I will hand back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, we'll run through a presentation at a double act between myself and Lee Hessians. This arose, the item, from discussion at the meeting of this subcommittee on the 2nd of July, and you recall that you received an update on the commercial review that was undertaken by People 2, and at the same meeting you also received a report that identified commercial opportunities potentially around the digital agenda. And we brought a report to that same meeting around how that was going to be approached, which was approved, but you did ask for an update on the ICT strategy, which was adopted in January, and we're pleased to present that to you this evening. So I'll just give a brief introduction and hand over to Lee, and kind of before we start, before I forget, perhaps, is just to put on record thanks to Lee for the work that he's been doing with regard to this that we'll set out. And there's the work that's been done, and obviously you've mentioned, Leader, in the past around the work of the ICT section in response to COVID. So not only doing that, but Lee's undertaken a great deal of work, and one of the many officers who've pulled out many of the stops in response to COVID and kept us going through that. And set out the progress, and that's what we'll look to do in this report. But as you're aware, there was an ICT strategy approved by the Policy and Resources Committee in January earlier this year, and that strategy was around a circa £10 million investment over 5 years, and that was approved as part of the budget at full council and the budget that came into effect for the financial year that we're currently in. Important, I think, to state that strategy was a long-term developed strategy. So there's awful lot of work and research went in behind that, and set us on that, as I say, that 5-year strategy. And that built on, as members are aware, the ICT networks infrastructure and managed service. We have a contract with NTT, formerly Dimension Data, and as well as taking forward that strategy, we've completed the transformation phase of that contract, which is around moving all those networks and infrastructure across to NTT, and for them to provide that managed service. So the IT service is on a much firmer platform, and that provided the catalyst really for us to then look at that transformation and the future strategy for ICT, which we set out in that report in January. And the purpose this evening is to give you an update on that, the progress that we've made in implementing that, and the next steps on that journey. Just briefly, the ICT strategy, and you can refer back to obviously the Policy and Resources Committee in January, but that had four pillars. You can see the 3 there, which was really about leveraging those technology advances and developing digital solutions. But remembering all the time also about focusing on the basics. That's about the trust and ensuring that the council can continue to rely on its ICT, not only its service, but its arrangements to ensure it provides the services which it does currently. But I think moving on to the next slide, I think what was key, and we said around that is, and there's a quote there that was in the ICT strategy, that in a bright, shiny ICT is not an end in itself. It needs to deliver council services that offer choice, transparency and value. And the ICT strategy was about and is about changing the way in which we deliver services to customers, in the way in which they expect and demand, and will increasingly expect and demand as we go forward. The same way they access many of their other services, their utilities, how they do the shopping. The council needs to adapt to that as well. And that was the primary driver for the ICT strategy, about improving the way we deliver services, but also the potential for significant ongoing efficiencies to be realised through that, using those technology advances and delivering services in a much more digital way. And that was the primary purpose for it, and that's what's core behind the ICT strategy. Lee's just going to talk a little bit in detail around the technology elements of that and the work we've done today, briefly, and the next steps, and then we're happy to take any questions at the end. Lee, do you want to take it on from there?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. So I thought I'd show a diagram to illustrate the cloud platform that we are building to deliver this change. I think I said when I presented the IT strategy that we have currently numerous systems that are customer facing. These are, in some cases, were purchased many years ago, and they do restrict our service offering to residents, and in some cases offer a disjointed service that you can do something digitally in one service area that is not available within other services. So what we're talking about here is building a platform that will enable this kind of change. So at the heart of that is a common data model, which what that simply means is that the more services and functions we put into this environment, we will have a single customer record, single asset, single property. So that will give us obviously better information across service, which at the moment is limited to within individual systems. At the heart of this is a modern platform that will enable us to connect other solutions, and we've obviously done that during some of our trials and some of the things that we've brought forward because of COVID around things like electronic signatures, identity management to verify people's identity. At the heart of all this is obviously security. So, you know, we will be holding customer details, customer proof of ID. All this has to be secure and compliant. And more importantly, this is a future-proof platform. Traditionally, we buy a solution. It may have a roadmap, it may not. And that, going back to my point around constraining the service offering that we can offer to residents. Shared data and business intelligence is at the heart of this. We will be able to exploit new and emerging technologies, which picks up on that leveraging technology pillar around using, Google Assistant or other sort of forms of service. But importantly, the more we'll be able to cross and connect data from our residents, who's using planning, who's using housing, who's using building control, etc. services, and make decisions based on that real fact-based decision. Importantly, a process environment. I was listening to the agenda item earlier about different service levels and different charges we may want to offer. At the moment, that would almost be impossible within our existing systems. It would be something that was probably calculated outside of systems. This could be redesigned in the way that we are going to deliver this technology in conjunction with services for a series of process reviews. At the heart of this as well, being able to mobilise our workforce, exposing sort of the information and the functions they need so that our staff can spend more time in the borough, reducing admin and eliminating unnecessary paperwork. And finally, on this simple diagram is something that's called omni-channel, which is opening up different ways of customer contact. At the moment, we've got traditional contact channels like email and telephony. Some services offer things like SMS, which goes back to my point about a kind of disjointed service offering. But this platform will open up contact from social media, from Alexa type services, whichever direction we want to go down. So this slide talks about the initial product roadmap and where we are. There's very much a key foundation phase, so there's phases on the left, phase 0, that's phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 0 is very much around us equipping our staff with the right end user devices so that they can access this technology and be able to work out in a remote fashion in the future. Recruiting the skills and specialists that we need to be able to help us with this and deliver the program and deploy once we've got the foundation in place. And phases 1 and 2 are about, we've currently got a Microsoft environment that needs to be migrated to the cloud and transformed so that we can start to take advantage of this new functionality. And as part of that process, we are modernizing the waste service, so building on the work that has happened within that service over the last year and the waste strategy. So this will be an example at the end of this of a full digital end-to-end solution. So an example being there that at the moment you can report online a missed bin, that goes down to staff at the depot who effectively turn that into an analog process before it's issued out to the operatives to action the request. What we're talking about here is that would be delivered to the relevant vehicle, so therefore not touching a human hand to be able to complete that request. Running in parallel and in phase 2 are some of the things that I'll talk about around the deployment of SharePoint and Microsoft Teams, which is about introducing secure and compliance with GDPR and improving our collaboration internally and externally. And once again, because that's in the Microsoft ecosystem, that opens up other opportunities for things like video calling with customers in the future. In phase 3, 4, 5, and 6, there's a big question mark to go to those because that's about deploying the platform. So we are saying that the waste service will be that proof of concept, and then a program will be developed to determine the sequencing of what happens next. So what have we done in the past 9 months? Clearly, as Paul mentioned earlier, there's significant effort that happened to keep the council working during the initial response to COVID, and that is ongoing. The initial roadmap development, so for this foundation phase to get us to that point I just talked about on that previous slide. We brought to Policy and Resources back in July the contract award for refreshing all of our end user estate. We are now at the final stages of sort of building and testing, and that will start to be rolled out in the coming weeks. This approach, obviously, to remind members that we're going down for this laptop first approach, which offers that flexibility for staff to work in different locations, and obviously has been rolled, as with looking at what space the council now needs in terms of accommodation to exploit this new way of working, which may obviously offer further down the line some commercial opportunities to release some office space. My service has been through a restructure. We had to do a whole service restructure to realign the service really in terms of, and that is coming to a conclusion. That has been in progress since August, and we will be going out to advert very shortly for some vacant roles. Running alongside that is a recruitment activity to bring along the digital resources, and these are the business facing resources that will work with services to deliver and develop that innovative. We are concluding, literally as we speak, a procurement activity to appoint a contract to a Microsoft partner to help us build and establish that cloud platform, ensuring that we build that in accordance with best practice. Waste proof of concept, currently underway, working with waste colleagues, is the process mapping to be able to then, once we've appointed the Microsoft partner, to be able to build the new services that are required to transform the waste function. We've also done an enormous amount of work around improving our processes and policies around information governance to ensure that we're compliant with GDPR. And we've also initiated, we're at an advanced stage of working with HR and finance colleagues to take that work into SharePoint, which once again will give us a sort of a level of automation and assurance against GDPR. And then other services will follow with that. We've also done this year fixing the plumbing, really. We needed to do some major work around rebuilding our GIS environment to make sure that it was a key foundation and aligned to the strategy so that we can start to expose information in a map-based form moving forward. And finally, running alongside that has been some digital experiments Some of them probably members are aware of. Obviously, the Waste Services app was developed. It's currently at a phase of, I think, the next version being developed. Electronic signatures using a product called DocuSign. Obviously, this was brought forward really because obviously to keep the council moving and working during the lockdown was essential. And then there's some other pilots that we've done, really of further testing the methodology and the approach. The key thing here is that, you know, what we have also worked out is that anything that we do now needs to fit into this future vision, and that has been, you know, a challenge for the organisation because we have had to stop doing certain projects to realign to this programme. So this is a you know, to give the committee some assurance around where the money gets spent in terms of over the years. Fundamentally, you know, it's an illustration at this point because as each component of the programme is developed, actual costings will come to light. So at this moment, this is indicative. But what it's attempting to show here is that there's an investment which was, you know, indicated as the 10 million that over time through the service redesign will deliver efficiencies through capacity release and a reduction in IT costs. So just to confirm what is coming up, really it's a summary of what I've spoken about before. We need to finalise the resources, get all those in place so that we can move forward at rapid pace with the programme. The establishment of the Microsoft Cloud following the contract award and building that foundation for the corporate programme of change. At that point during 2021, transforming the waste service to introduce that full digital end-to-end solution and rolling out that collaborative platform for SharePoint and Teams. The key point really on here is the last slide, which was phases 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and. We're also looking at what that corporate programme of review would look like after this, and that sequence to be determined, which will be done in consultation with members. At the moment, we are looking at some of the risk areas that we might have, particularly from our existing applications, and that will get fed into that work. And finally, as Paul alluded to, obviously I understand that there was a previous report to this committee on some of the potential digital opportunities, and our engagement with people too is carrying on. We've had recent discussions with them about the programme and about when some things might come to fruition, and work that they are doing is helping us understand where to identify and to exploit any opportunities. Clearly, part of our contract for the award of the Microsoft partner is looking, you know, making sure that we own the intellectual property of any developed solution, so that if anything comes out of that, then we've got a route to be able to market it. Along this journey, we will be modernising our services, which will deliver efficiencies to support the council's financial position, and we will put our services in an improved state and in a more cost-effective position that may offer commercial opportunities for those services. And I think finally, this technology change will put Basildon at the forefront of any change and put us in a strong position with regards to programmes or initiatives such as LGR at the point they may happen. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Paul. If we could unshare the screen so I'm able to see. Members, if you can indicate. Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Chair. No, it's an interesting presentation. Thank you both. I just wanted to comment on a few things and ask a few questions as well. An interesting point on DocuSign and the electronic signatures, and I'm just, in terms of the scope of that, obviously there's the Law Society are doing a review on electronic signatures and wet signatures at the moment. And I'm just seeing, are we aware of any other opportunities that could come into play, depending on the outcome of that Law Society review? And I noted before, when this matter came to policy and resources earlier in the year, we were talking about the possibility of chatbots in terms of the customer service side of things, and the integration of artificial intelligence as well as part of that program. Is that still scoped in at some point as part of that later work? There's sort of a question related to that. How disrupt, it's probably a stupid question, this, so apologies, but I am a layperson, I'm a counsellor, but it has been extremely disruptive, COVID-19, in terms of everything. Obviously, your plans, as you put them in January, have any of them been actually postponed considerably as a result of COVID-19? And the interesting on this waste management pilot, and what's possible from that. It's been noted when the issues come up in PITSI in respect of fly tipping, or in terms of issues generally, that the bin people are actually able to report issues back. It sounds like this could make it a lot easier for them to actually report issues of fly tipping as well. And in terms of the management information that could generate, will it help us at a macro level to identify problem areas in terms of fly tipping and actually be able to solutionize on the basis of that?
I'll leave, if I may, Chairman Lee, to probably come back on the chat box, the AI and the fly tipping and the issues around that. I think just in terms of COVID, we've only been going 9 months, and I think, as I said, part of the commending Lee at the start is the progress that's been made whilst dealing with that. So I think if there's any slippage, we're talking a matter of, we'd probably like to have been a couple of weeks ahead in terms of where we are with end user device rollout, for example. But it's that kind of slippage element. But I think on the other hand, we've made significant progress around information governance, and really important, and should have said at the outset that that's integral to this, because I think it's the point, you can't really organise and automate chaos. And in terms of having that governance in a very clean platform and knowing what data we have, so significant progress has been made around that as well. So in terms of the COVID-19, not significant, but I don't know if you can just pick up on the issue. I know chatbots, AI, and that is considered to be fundamentally important to this, and a key element, and around the fly tipping, which I think is a great example of how this will change the way in which we deliver services. Do you want to pick up on those, Lee?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we have been, as one of the digital experiments, been looking at a chatbot example. But I think I remember the question you raised about that at PNR, and I think the answer I gave them was, obviously you could go and put chatbots, as you quite rightly know, develop that quite quickly. But where they really have major advantage is when you have looked at what the whole end-to-end process is, and that's where the real advantage. So the example I gave, on that first diagram was, we're putting in that foundation that gives us the flexibility to leverage those new technologies or any emerging technology at the right time. So it's not on a definite roadmap that we're going to be doing it in, at a point in time, but it's not been ruled out either. The point around DocuSign, I will note that we're obviously rolling it out at the moment internally to keep the council running, really, to avoid staff having to come into the office. We haven't yet rolled it out in any areas where, like such as legal, where it might be obviously a higher risk, but we will maintain that as a watching brief. I think the other point on has COVID impacted? It certainly has impacted in the speed that we could undertake the restructure, because initially we were waiting for guidance on whether we could do things like consultations virtually. So that probably introduced a few months there as well. Absolutely, your point is, what around the waste management is we're looking at this moment in time in those processes. We're looking to put in-cab technology in vehicles, and that will enable obviously the operatives to be able to close cases as they action them, rather than at the moment they have to go back to base at the end of the day. So it's a much more reactive response, and the response back to the customer will be better. But clearly what I was talking about is in terms of the shared data and shared intelligence, absolutely, all those things, you can start to be much more intuitive. The use of things like AI, I've seen some examples through the demos that we've done of the procurement of the Microsoft Cloud, that you can even start to predict things such as, based on this customer's previous contact with the council, are they likely to make a complaint? So you can start to be very proactive in the way that you manage our customers. And obviously very much you will then start to see a greater picture on which residents are consuming which services, and be able to tailor services accordingly. And equally, from our own staff's perspective, if you imagine an example, if you was, a housing officer going into a block of flats, you could be given access to information to know that the resident at number 22 has also got an outstanding planning application, or has got a dispute running over their refuse, or et cetera, et cetera. So we're providing a much wider set of information to both residents and to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just say on this, my view is I think we look like we're a bit behind the ball game in terms of other councils on the way they're dealing with IT. And whilst we put the £10 million in this year as a result of what was being planned, this should have started at least 18 months or more ago. Because I'll tell you why I'm thinking this. Lee has come forward and said, we're looking for a cloud partner. The procurement is going out. But until we get that person, the rest of it, as I understand it, Lee, stays not in place. You can make certain judgments and start planning things, but you can't action them. So the route optimization procurement cannot start until we know we've got the partner and how it's going to fit in with the cloud. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because when I was asked to be chairman of NMPS, I thought this is a good role to play, but I was thrown a couple of time bombs straight away. One was the waste strategy, which should have started, I think, previously. It didn't, because the circular economic package agreed by the EU and accepted by the British government was approved in 2018, and that had ramifications on the way we deal with waste. And then there was the government's environmental bill, which is just going through the House, which has major implications on the way we deal with waste. That is why I've been working with officers to try and ensure that by July next year, the in-cab technology is in place, that it operates from then, because we're going to need it by then, so that we will know where the vehicle is. If the app is upgraded to sufficient standard at the same time, residents will know when their collections are coming, where their vehicle is, exactly the same as Amazon do now. You know where your Amazon delivery is coming. Why are we so far behind the game? I really believe we are. And if we'd have been ahead of this, we would have been in a far better position, also financially, in dealing with some of the problems we've got, i.e. of dealing with a waste strategy, which we've got a working group looking at, and we're trying. You've got to dismiss politics from it completely, because we've got to go down a certain road. The government will be insisting upon that. And the next one coming up, which was going to be involved, and we will need a good IT system for it, is the climate bill, which is there. And now we're going to have to deal with that as well. So there's a whole range of things. And I'm only looking at the problems I've got with my committee, and no doubt I think other members will be looking on housing, etc., and see similar problems. And to be fair, I think, and I'm not blaming officers here tonight, but we've dealt too long, and members previously have accepted too easily. It's to passing pieces of paper around the offices, around the depot to get things done, either by email or whatever. No real strategy, which has cost time and money over a good few years. And I think we should have been ahead of this game and not behind it.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Does any officer want to come back on those points?
Just, I mean, just to pick up really, I think we are clearly behind some authorities and we're ahead of some, and we'd have liked to have been further on than we are. I'm sure that applies to us all. I think certainly my involvement in terms of the IT service over the last couple of years, and I think integral to that has been that thing that I mentioned briefly at the beginning around the contract with NTT. So actually getting the managed networks and infrastructure in a solid foundation and a solid place, which then the authority can build on, and that provides a platform to then deliver that. So once we were into that contract and we built that foundation stage, we turned our attention towards the strategy and the future of ICT, which we set out now and moving quickly. And obviously the council has supported that through its investment, and hopefully set out for you this evening the exciting programme and the ambition, which will certainly be well up there with any other authority, in my view. In terms of what previous to that, and you know, how whether we could have been ahead of this 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's difficult to particularly respond to, and that hindsight point around why that wasn't, I can't answer that particularly this evening, but I think it's fair to say we are probably a little behind some authorities and behind where we will want to be, but as hopefully we've given you some assurance, we're working as hard as we can to move them forward quickly, and we're now in a position to support that waste strategy and the changes, and that's been mentioned as the first point, and we're now in a position to do that. And I think if we'd have waited further, then we wouldn't have been able to capitalise on that as well. So I would agree, but hopefully we've provided some assurance. But I don't know, Lee, if you want to add anything to that or the points that Councillor Harrison made.
Yes, I mean, I think the other thing as well is that sometimes, as with anything, it's about the right point in time. I think we are now in a position, I think, with the technology choices that we have made, that gives assurance that it's a future-proof environment. If this was 3 years ago, I'm not sure whether that product suite would have been around, and whether we would have been able to standardize on a single sort of environment. So sometimes it is about what you buy when, and the timing of these things. We possibly could have incurred lots of other costs by trying to integrate and interconnect various solutions together that may not have delivered the same outcome that we're aiming to achieve here.
I've got the Deputy Chief Exec.
If I may, thank you. I would agree with Paul Birkinshaw's point about, and your point, Councillor, about being behind the 8 ball at Basildon. And it would be fair to say, yes, we probably were. However, there's been significant changes in the last 12 months around this particular programme, as Lee has described tonight, which has taken some building to get. I think the other point that Lee just made about when you buy your kit is an interesting one. Having experience of running a very large service and having to purchase a new application for that large service, I was, how can I say, I was somewhat bounced by an IT company for that. Now we don't have to do that. Now we can create our own destiny with Microsoft, and that's what we're doing at Basildon. And the other point I would make, which I think either Paul or Lee made, was that actually what we're also doing is lining up our strategies. So a waste strategy is lining up to it. Soon at P&R, there will be a workforce strategy. You will be hearing about the culture and how we want to change the organisation. And this particular set of actions that have been taken through the IT strategy are going to be the enabler for the organisation, and a massive internal change programme to not only be a more customer focused organisation, it's also upskilling ourselves for the future, to be fit for the future. And we're aligning our strategies to support it. Our MTFS, our workforce strategy, our organisational strategy, our IT and digital programme all talk the same language, which will probably be one of the first times that's happened also.
Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you. I've got another point which I meant to raise when you were going through the slides, and it was to do with obviously cybercrime and the risk of that. Obviously, we have data. There is ransomware attacks that happen all the time, and there is that risk that we could be a target. Is this part of our strategy as well, and making sure that we've got defenses or we've got the right processes to deal with any sort of cyber attack?
Lee, can you pick that up?
I can, yes. Obviously, as part of the contract award that Paul referred to with NCT, we upgraded a lot of our security products, put in place complete new sort of networks and firewalls and all those sorts of things. Part of it's obviously at the heart of everything we do, and it is something that we need to continuously monitor and review, because obviously potential hackers are getting smarter and smarter. We're not talking now about the original early hackers of hacking into networks. That's much more difficult than it used to be. They generally try and social engineer and rely on somebody internally sort of replying to an email or inadvertently putting in their user credentials. So we're designing security and privacy at the heart of everything we do, and putting the right controls around it. It's, as I said, an evolving picture, because as we move more away from what used to be a building network to a much more hybrid environment where we're consuming cloud services. We've got staff working around the borough, we've got staff working at home. So it is a blend of technical controls and sort of user awareness to maintain that security picture.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baggott, do you want to come in?
I would have done, but all the points have been ably raised by both Councillor Harrison and Councillor Rimmer that I'd noted, so I'm not going to prolong it just for the sake of repeating the issues that have been raised.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, from my point of view, I am not an IT expert, but I am an expert in deciphering waffle. And if I look at the commercial opportunity slide that we saw there, this is what the purpose of this committee is. So I'm not overly bothered about getting into the intricacies of the policy and of the strategy. P&R did that. I'm interested in understanding the commercial benefits of the IT strategy. And what I am not hearing and what I am not seeing anywhere here is an assessment of what we are looking to save. So there was a line in the piece there about how in the IT strategy we did talk about revenue raising. We did talk about this being a way of making financial savings. We are nearly a year on from that strategy going through policy and resources. We are nearly a year on from councillors giving £10 million over the next 5 years to an IT strategy. I still don't know in each of the service areas what we are looking to get in projected savings, or in terms of how we are looking to bring in commercial revenue. So I have no idea from what I've seen tonight what we are looking to do in planning, what we're looking to do in licensing, in the finance team, in the housing team. I've no idea from what I've seen tonight. All I've been told is that there's a load of back office cloud-based systems that are all up and running, and we're GDPR compliant 4 years after GDPR came in. All good stuff. I've no doubt at all. But the idea, looking at the roadmap that is here, the idea that we're going to wait until 9 months into 2021 before we start looking at the corporate program of review and technology enablement, you shake your head, but it's on the slide that we were presented this evening. So it's there. The idea we're going to wait until then, I think, is for the birds. So that cannot happen, right? And then when I look at the remainder of it here, I mean, again, I'm not an IT expert, but until we know what planning or licensing or housing want to do, how can we have IT software in place that enables that? How is it possible that we are not narrowing options available to those service areas by putting the cart before the horse? Now, if I'm wrong, and there's a technical reason I'm wrong, please dispel that myth. But as I sit here now, to me, I think, unless you know what you want to do, how do you build the apparatus to do it? So I think we need to understand that. This is not an attack on Lee, by the way, because Lee's job is to deliver. This is about all of the services having a very clear understanding. When the administration set a target of digitalizing services by 2025, what that means and how we get there. Now, we've heard about waste, but I don't hear about any other service area other than you can now sign your housing on a DocuSign. Well, welcome to 2020. That's hardly revolution. The idea that we might be able to get video calls with customers if we play our cards right in a few years' time, when the world jumped on Zoom in 3 weeks back in March, and now we're all doing this in terms of conducting our business. So, I was going to be almost nice and say, well, COVID has probably had an impact and all the rest of it, but the officers have dispelled it and said, well, it hasn't. So then you're left scratching your head saying, well, how comes we are not running a concurrent operation here of building an infrastructure whilst at the same time understanding what you want the infrastructure to do in each of the services? Now, I am confident that in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be told that that is happening. So therefore, my question is, why the hell was that not part of the presentation that we have just seen on the commercial subcommittee? Mandy, you are waving at me.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yes, you are going to be told that, and perhaps it may have been more helpful to members this evening if we'd spoken more about applications and applications that we currently use within the organisation. And what that means by applications is big systems. So we might have a big system for running the housing service, but we may have a tiny application that has a bespoke service for the prevention of homelessness. So it may have been more helpful perhaps this evening for members to get some insight into the programme of change for those, because they are the points you're just making. And we are parallel running. We are using waste as the test against all service. There's pretty much every service the council's going to apply or function, I should say, are going to find in waste. And what we mean by that is it's inquire about it, book it or pay for it. So we are intending to run a programme that is parallel to the waste programme change that is happening now. It will then overlay to the rest of the council's functionality. There will then perhaps be some specialism to the back office for planning perhaps. But Lee can help me out a bit more here, probably. But when you look at a service, they generally aren't they're not, I know an individual receives a bespoke service from the council around their particular set of circumstances. But when you break it down to an IT world, you're generally looking at recording data, holding data. That's generally what you're looking at. So we are taking the approach pan the organisation, because as we described earlier, we recognise we're behind the 8 ball. So we want to parallel run, starting with waste because of all the obvious things that Councillor Harrison spoke about and the urgency around that. And I want to modernise our waste services, but we equally want to modernise our service. So we're going to parallel run application review based upon that front-facing customer application. So maybe, Lee, I don't know if members would like more detail either, I don't know, I'm putting Lee on the spot a bit, but at another time soon to bring back to talk about application rationalisation.
Let me just say, it's not on Lee's shoulders to come to the committee to tell the committee what housing want to do to digitalise their service.
No.
That's on our housing team. Similarly, it's on the planning team, the licensing team, the finance team, and all the rest of it. So it's not on Lee to come back and to do that. But I come back to it. Again, I'm not a tech person, so you can talk to me about applications for this, that, and the other. I don't know what that means. What I want to understand is, what is it that the housing team want to use technology to deliver? And then when we look at that, how much money can it save? How great it makes the service, the policy, great, but how much money could it potentially bring in, purpose of this committee, the commercial committee, and could it be sold?
Yes,
And
yes.
could it go on to something else, right? So, and I want that on every single service area. So that's what I think this committee needs to understand. Now, if the idea is that they're not there yet, then we need to understand why. But if you're telling me, which I think you are, that they are there with each of those individual service areas, then let's come back here in 4 weeks' time and let's talk about that.
I think it would be helpful, perhaps, if we do come back to talk to you in more detail about the type of IT each service is using. And that's what I mean by applications. And I think it would be helpful to members this evening, and I'm looking to Paul and Lee to either say yes or no, to understand a little bit more of how Basildon is currently manages its services through IT. And there is a corporate approach to this, which has not happened in the past. So we have been a hostage to fortune, if you like, around individual services, buying individual bits of IT that now do not talk to each other. Now that's not efficient. And Lee spoke earlier, and Paul spoke earlier about how we want to simplify and automate.
I don't mean to cut across you, and we'll bring
That's
others
fine.
in. But what my point is, what you're describing there, great for policy and resources, right? That's a policy issue about the corporate resources and how the council gets behind it. This committee is interested in how the individual service areas can either save money, raise money, sell their services. So what is the IT looking at to be able to do that? That is the purpose. Otherwise, we'd have just gone to B&R. So, that's what we need to understand far more here versus what we've just seen on the screen. So I think Paul wants to come in, and then Dave, Councillor Harrison. Paul? And then,
sorry, Chairman, just to build on really, and I think, I'm not sure it's in terms of the approach which we're taking, but I think when we spoke about the digital team and that further phase is about the end-to-end process design. So that's around having that resource to go in and as I said at the beginning, this isn't just about IT and applications and kit. It's about changing the way that those are done from end to end, and that's where those efficiencies and savings will come in. So it's about that resource going in, looking at how them processes are delivered and redesigning that with the IT enablement that we've now got. So I think it will apply to all. The services need to be delivered obviously in the most efficient and effective way, and clearly that's a commercial thing in itself to do that. But I think the IT strategy, there's a lot of that detail behind it around where them efficiencies can be achieved, and that was based on the calculation that the 10 million investment is recoverable through them efficiencies and changing the way which services are delivered. We know that, and you members will know and complain obviously around customer services and the amount of telephone calls that they receive, which is significant. And clearly by changing that and giving customers the access to services and updates straight to them, then that reduces that demand significantly and gets people to serve for themselves. I'm not sure whether it's about and understand around that approach, but the approach of the IT strategy is to build that platform and then going to those areas and carry out the end-to-end process design and apply the ICT solutions to enable that to be a much more efficient and effective service. The order of them will depend on many factors. So we have systems where there's risks, where there's significant costs. There'll be issues where members feel we should be focusing, and where's that greatest opportunity to deliver. But does this service, and for all services, it should be providing services in the way customers expect, and that's what the end-to-end process redesign is around. That's what that digital team, the digital factory, is about, and then applying that through IT solutions that change significantly the way that we deliver them.
But again,
as I've said, I don't think they're there yet because they don't know what's available and what's possible, because that's just being built and the Microsoft suite is developing.
But I think I'll bring councillors, all three councillors want to come in now. So the thing I would just say is I don't understand that in the context of what does each individual council service want to do. That is the question that we're debating here, not what a digital factory over there can deliver in terms of end-to-end solutions. But Councillor Harrison, you want to come in?
Fortunate with the NMPS committee in that because waste strategy has reared its ugly head and we've got to do something, that the committee, I think, are beginning to understand, although the membership keeps changing. I think I've only got 2 people there now who were there originally, but start to understand, because we were talking about it from when it started. I wonder whether or not it would be the best thing to each committee members to look at what the strategy is, what's proposed by Lee, and look how their committee, what their requirements are, because at the moment, as I understand it, that may be happening, I don't know, but it may be happening. But I would have thought some member input or member knowledge of how it's going, what's going on. So you start talking and putting forward other ideas, because I mean, Paul Brace has been very helpful. He's listened to suggestions. I've had many meetings with him, and it's being open and talking to one another. You get the feel that you're doing it the right way. And also don't forget, with the waste strategy, the staff in the depot have been involved in how we go about it as well. Now, should that not apply also under housing? I don't know if that's happening. It should apply. It may be happening with members. Should that not apply across the board?
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, Chair. You were unusually harsh to the officers, I thought, when you were talking about waffle, Mr. Chairman. I thought that they actually were shortcutting to essentially a assumed position of knowledge where we'd actually acquired from the previous report in January.
I think he was talking about me, Craig.
I'm sure he wasn't. But going back to the actual points made in terms of commercial opportunities, I think some of them have actually been illustrated reasonably well in terms of the actual cost savings that could actually be made potentially by the move up to self-serve through digital apps and through IT for our residents. The fact that actually, as we gather more data in terms of the actual services that are being used, in this case, the waste management pilot, we will actually be able to predict using AI where the problem areas will actually be in the future, and actually have a greater idea of actually where we can target sort of fly tipping inspections to make sure that actually we're picking up revenue from the worst offenders. So that there's that sort of data capture that could happen. When we're talking about changes that planning and other sections of housing might make in the future, the IT systems, if you've got an AI system that's based on decision trees, it's about managing that forest and actually changing the decision trees that actually applying that based on changes to the process. And I think that that's been what's been communicated tonight. Could they go faster? Could they have started sooner? I've asked that question, as Lee would know, in terms of the AI. They are the experts. We've asked the question. They've given us the answer. Should we be going all Michael Gove on them and saying don't trust experts? I don't know, Mr. Chairman. But in this case, I'm minded to trust what they're saying and the approach they're taking. And I think they have done remarkably well in taking us from a position where we couldn't even have a conference call at one point as part of the meeting to where we're all working remotely. And so I've got to applaud that and that effort that's been made. And I can see commercial opportunities as presented. I think you're right, though, to ask for greater detail. I think you're right to look at how it applies across the piece. But I think they have illustrated to some degree the potential for savings, so cutting those costs and potentially increasing revenue as well.
Thank you, Councillor Rimmer. Councillor Baggett.
Thank you, Chairman. Let's see how many people I can upset in one conversation or speech. I get Councillor Callaghan's frustration here. And the point has been missed, I think, by a number of officers and some of the members. Members, officers, they've been talking about strategy, they've been talking about policy, they've been talking about integrated systems. Now, what Councillor Callaghan is saying, and I get this isn't the committee to discuss strategies, policies, integrated systems, everything else. We've got committees all over the shop that can do that. This committee is the commerciality committee. Now, part of it is maybe not being given the right direction. That what should have come here today is a report saying these are the investment opportunities that we foresee in the future that we're looking at, or these are the conversations we've had with the department where there can be savings. In this particular respect, in this committee, yes, as a council, it should be obvious we want to provide the best service to residents, but that isn't a commerciality discussion. And part of this comes down to what I've said right from the get-go when we were talking about introducing commerciality. And with all due respect to Councillor Callaghan, on a number of times when I've said this, it's deliberately been obfuscated to get the worst possible outlook. What I've said is, it is unfair when we're exploring the idea of commerciality to expect officers whose thought processes and career is geared around process, policy, and everything else to suddenly become Richard Bransons. And where the missing piece of the jigsaw still is in all of this is having someone, be it a consultant or be it somebody seconded, that has the commerciality experience that can be going in, asking departments the right questions to get them thinking in the right way, to be having the conversations with Lee and saying, are you aware that if, you know, this is what needs to be done, and providing that integral conduit between process and policy and transforming it to commerciality and money. And if someone is going to tell me we have that, then they haven't done the job tonight, because this report was a report that you'd expect to see a policy and resources. It's not a report I would have expected to see in this particular environment within the remit of this committee. And that's where Councillor Callaghan is coming from. And in this, I very rare, I would say this, I support where he's coming from. And what we really need to be doing, and this is not the fault of Lee, it's not the fault of the Deputy Chief Executive or anybody as officers. It is a gap which needs to be addressed as we take ourselves out of commerciality. I mean, it might be, I don't know that Mr. Sparks is still here or not, it might be he's able to say, oh, no, we've got this. Now, I did think at some point, I did get told about a new appointment we got, who I don't know why I thought that they were of a commerciality bent, that they were brought in for that. But if that's the case, on this particular report, they flubbed the ball, because there's absolutely nothing in this report which has any sort of insight or input. And what Councillor Callaghan said is right. A £10 million investment to a service. And what this report says is that maybe at some point in the future, we might be able to offer a better service to residents. But apart from that, we don't really have a Scooby as to what commercial impact is. And that is not what we would be expecting of this committee. So I hope I haven't upset too many people in that, but I get where Councillor Callaghan is coming from.
No, I understand. And as I've always said to you, Andy, if you agree with me more, you'll find life is always easier. Paul, I think you wanted to come
all
back.
The other way around.
I do, yes, Chair. And I just, with respect, refer members back to the meeting of this committee on the 2nd of July, where we had a presentation, as I mentioned, from people too, and we brought a report to this committee on the approach to commerciality around the digital agenda, and you endorsed the approach that was set out in there, and you specifically asked and referenced a 10 million investment in the ICT strategy, and asked the question, what progress has been made with the ICT strategy, and therefore accordingly we've come back and presented that to you. If there's further matters, which there is, that have been identified, then we're happy to bring them as well. But I would just refer you back to that meeting. And I think, as Lee has mentioned as well, ongoing discussions are taking place with people too, commercial experts, as is referenced, to ensure that we can capitalise on those opportunities and understand them as they come forward. So that's an integral element of it. So I suppose in summary, apologies if it's not what members were expecting, but it is what you asked for on the 2nd of July.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did also ask you earlier this week for this to reflect what was going on in each of the services, which it did not do. Does any member wish to come back in on this point? In which case, we will note, well, it's a verbal report, so there's no need to note it. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Paul, for that. Our final agenda item tonight, I will come back and Annie, remind me at the end to talk about where we take that next. I just want to get members' availability before we do that. Agenda item 9 is Beam Energy. Owen, I'll bring you in for this one.
Kirsty's going to pick up just a brief update for members, Chair.
Thank you. Kirsty.
Thank you, Chair. At the end of 2019, the Policies and Resources Committee approved that we enter into an inter-authority agreement with the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham to provide a white label energy packet through the Beam Energy brand. And the purpose of that procurement then was to provide a not-for-profit energy package for the Basildon residents and to allow energy prices to become affordable in comparison to the Big Six, and to offer 100% green renewable tariffs, and to enable us with our voids experience. At the end of August this year, the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham have served notice on Nottingham City Council for the termination of the Beam Energy White Label Agreement. As many of you may have seen, that Nottingham City Council had encountered quite a few issues with this, and they took the decision to sell their Beam Energy, the Notting Hill energy, through to Ofgem, and they were sold it on to British Gas. So this obviously come from the market. The Big Six competitors, there's been quite a lot of changes across the energy tariffs with gas and energy, and this no longer was viable commercially to do this. We had previously paid a £10,000 fee for this service, which has now been refunded by the London Borough. We have also had 6 customers that were affected in the borough, and these customers were offered cheaper or same tariffs, so there was no individual that was affected in our borough. And we asked for all links to Beam Energy on the website to be removed, so we had nothing Basildon Council branded on that website residing, and all 6 residents in the borough were contacted in regarding to this. So the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham reacted really quickly to the situation. They took responsive action, and we have not been adversely financially affected. So we have, removed ourselves from any of this, and the customers have transferred over to British Gas now. So it's just a verbal update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will bring members in. God, I remember at the time when back in 2015 this was classed as communism, but here we go, the Big Six all doing their job of coming in and supporting people on the lowest tariff. So the public sector did its job at forcing the private sector into a better position. I think it's worth noting, just as an aside to this, that it's been referenced tonight, the People 2 work. We received that presentation back in the spring. And we said at that time that we do also want to look at green energy and the possibilities commercially that exist within our own borough. And obviously with the master plan, there is the district heating network. There are options in and around waste for the council to look commercially. So although Beam Energy is one part of the council's green agenda in commercial, and Beam has come to an end, it is by no means the end of what the council should be looking at when it comes to green energy. I think we should make that point very clear. That it would be helpful to understand, if not this, then what. And I think in your team and people who are looking at that and some of those opportunities anyway. But I think it's important that we make that point. Craig, sorry, Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you. So I did warn that there was this risk, I think, when this first came to P&R. And I'm not going to go, I told you so, but I just question whether we should be going along with this strategy again, because There's the Which Super complaint that's obviously looking at the pricing strategy of energy companies generally that get people in on low rates and then penalize loyalty after that. So we know that's going on. But also we know that people probably do better out of strategies where they're constantly moving energy companies, and that actually now in this more digital age, there are actually sort of companies that are helping people move for them and do that as well. So it's becoming a much more competitive space in terms of that. And when we say we've got a low tariff, that's compared to people on a certain fixed rate with these big six, then they might actually be missing out on the lowest possible tariffs by actually moving around. So I do wonder about the financial well-being impact of that, although I think the intentions of this policy were good. And obviously we have to support the sort of intent in terms of green energy in itself. I accept that too, but I just think there's quite a bit of risk for the residents here, quite a bit of risk for the council. I don't think they're getting the best result in terms of financial well-being. I'm also concerned, and this is more of a question, where you said we only had 6 people that actually took this up. And what sort of window did they have to take it up? Because obviously that is a measure of engagement with this as well. Obviously, if it was 6 hours, fair enough, but how many days, how many weeks, how many months?
Yeah, Councillor Rimmer, good point. Owen?
So, Chair, I think obviously when we went into Beam Energy, we explained to members what was offered, how we were going to support residents and sort of circumstances might be beneficial to residents. Obviously, residents were able to sort of sign up to Beam Energy for a period of time, any time over a number of months. We didn't heavily promote it. We were waiting for the right time to do it, not pre-Christmas, post-Christmas. So there's time issues there. I think it's worth highlighting to members. Obviously, commercial activity, there is risks associated with everything we do, and obviously we've mitigated that and managed that. But I think it just reflects that there are risks associated with all these commercial activities, and obviously as members we need to be mindful of them and make sure we evaluate them in everything we do. And I think it just reflects back on how we need to give that due diligence and that consideration and everything we do.
I think.
Sorry.
Go on.
So I appreciate you're saying it was soft launched, but I'm still concerned that that's only 6 residents that took it up in what period, because that was the question that wasn't really answered. So from soft launch to the cessation of the contract, of the partnership, sorry, how many? Yeah, what period was that?
Kirsty, how long? It's quite a long period, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah, it was about 9 months.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that point, I mean, 6 is very low. Now, obviously, for the purposes of this, it's not worked, so therefore there's less work for us to do to come out of it. But I can't help but think, and this is where I come back to this issue that we were talking about in the previous item about joined up approach across the council. Can't help but think we may have had more than 6 voids in a year. And I can't help but think that Sempra opened more than 6 homes in a year. So again, we at the committee in P&R, a year ago, almost to the day, or whenever it was, we were looking and part of the strategy was about voids and all the rest of it going on to Beam so that the council could make a bit of money. Not a lot, but some money. Why did that not happen? Anyway.
I'll pick up and Kirsty can correct me if I get the details wrong. There were some delays in working through with the housing department and the company we were putting our void properties through, and there were some delays with Beam Energy in getting that void turnaround. So that was our default provider, and that seamless from a void property going void to them being then signed up to Beam Energy was not put in place during that period, and there were delays in making that happen, which were unfortunate. But that's why we didn't have that seamless end-to-end process that wasn't working.
Members, are there any further questions or comments on Beam? In which case, officers, thank you. Members, if we could just hang fire just for a moment. Thank you to the watching public as well. We will see you again at our next meeting. Thank you all.